Thank you everybody for coming. I'm really amazed by how many people were able to attend this talk today. I have put a lot of effort into slides and the project, so I hope you enjoy it and get something out of it. Why did I choose Angular out of all the frameworks? For me, it was a simple choice. I've already tried everything else, so I wanted to, Angular was the next logical choice after Backbone and Ember and jQuery. Also, this is going to be a very super packed talk, so please hold off all the questions until the very end. I only have 1 hour to cover everything, and I'm going to go through the slides, and after the slides, I will do the live coding. Slides will comprise majority of this talk, about 40 minutes or so, and the reason I chose so is because I think you will learn a lot more from the slides rather than watching me live code, which is based on the tutorial online, which you can read anytime on my blog. This is my Twitter account, and if you have any questions, feedback, or comments, just ping me on Twitter. I have been writing JavaScript for almost 2 years now, and I build on a lot of open source projects on GitHub. Yes, you can say GitHub is like my second home. Last week, I've had 5,000 contributions on GitHub for last 12 months. And yeah, so I haven't actually been programming for that long. After high school, I joined the US Air Force, where I was in active duty until about 2008. I got out, then I went back home to New York, and I didn't know what I was going to do. So I enrolled into the community college. I enrolled in a computer science degree, and I graduated and then transferred to the four-year school from there to the City College or CUNY School. And thank you. I graduated from there this May. And right after graduation, I decided to attend hacker school, where I can code basically all day long for 3 months without any pressure, work or school. And it has been like 3 months of nonstop programming. So what is next for me after hacker school? In less than 2 weeks, I'll be moving to Sunnyvale to join Yahoo team. So that's my near-term plans. By the show of hands, how many of you have seen this tutorial or have attended my talk in June or have done this tutorial online? Okay, so this live demo will be similar to this, but not exactly. I've pushed updates yesterday by adding a lot of changes. I've added animations with the ng animate. I've refactored a lot of codes. I've updated UI. I've added Google and Facebook sign-in methods. So there are quite a few changes, but the tutorial is still not up to date at the moment, and I'm planning to update it very shortly. Why am I showing a free AngularJS screencast here? I think these are top 3 the best free introduction to AngularJS screencasts on the internet, and I don't want to repeat everything they have already said. I think you should definitely watch this if you haven't done so. This will be my introduction to AngularJS and my best practices and how I've learned AngularJS. Here's the overview of today's talk. We'll cover what is AngularJS. We'll dive into deep of each Angular component, like what is the scope, what is the controller, what is the model, just to get yourself familiar with the terminology. And if you have done Angular before, then it's probably boring for you, but please understand that I have to cover this just so we are on the same page for somebody who has never done Angular before. But we'll go into thinking in Angular, and I think this is section you might find useful if you have done jQuery in the past, and how do you transition to Angular. Next, we'll go talk about Angular's best practices. We'll talk about JavaScript best practices. We'll look at the big picture of how the whole server is architected. You have REST API and Angular and database. How does it all fit together? We'll go to live coding, and after that, I'm going to switch back to slides to show you some links for the learning resources and closing notes. So what is Angular? Angular is basically a complete client-side framework. It has routing, templating, data binding, form validations. It has reusable components like services. It has a built-in module system. And if you have worked with Backbone before, you know what a pain it is to use require.js to bring all your modules of the application. So Angular gives you it for free. So in other words, what you have is you have a framework to be able to build rich and interactive web applications. It's a framework that allows you to build single-page applications. Unlike traditional web apps, they basically never reload. SoundCloud is a good example of this. As far as I know, they haven't used Angular, but it's a good demonstration of what a single-page app is. When you play the music, you are able to transition to Explore, for example, or you can go to different artists, and the music will still keep playing in the background because you're changing the page, but you're not actually physically reloading. It behaves more like an app rather than traditional website. It basically uses Ajax to communicate with your server without reloading the page. So you have, this is your Angular client side, for example. You have an Angular app. In the middle, you have the server, could be your node server. And on the right side, you have a database, like a MongoDB or Postgres. So the key difference here is rather than relying on a Vue technology to perform a server-side rendering of the HTML, you have a RESTful web service, which simply populates and returns a JSON object. And RESTful is not a library, and if you haven't heard of it, it's just an architecture for your routes. And here's an example of RESTful API. You have a resource called shows, and depending on a route, depending on a verb, get, post, put, or delete, it has different meanings. For example, get API shows will return all the shows. And it doesn't really, it's not going to return, it's just a convention to follow this. And that's what we call REST API. So for example, when you do the get API shows, you'll get this JSON object. And again, we are not rendering pages like with Express and Jade and Rails or Django. We are simply returning JSON object like this. You consume it in Angular, and you display it. So Angular, unlike other frameworks like Backbone or maybe Ember, it embraces HTML by extending into a more expressive format. So you see all those attributes like ng-source, ng-repeat, or ng-mouse-enter. Those are attributes that Angular extends to allow you to build web applications. Basically, they are saying is everyone is familiar with HTML already, so it has been here for a long time. It's not going to go anywhere, so why fight it? Let's extend it and use that. And okay, that's the basically what is AngularJS section. Next, we'll dive into each of the Angular's components in no particular order. At the end, I will sum it up in a big list of what each of those components are and what do they do. So first is a scope. Scope is an object that refers to the application model. It acts as a glue between a view and a controller. For example, you have a $scope.text equal to hello world. And then when you reference it in your template here as in a curly braces, it'll be displayed inside of your HTML page. So anything you put on a $scope object can be accessed from your template within the bounds of a controller. And what I mean is that you have an ng controller here attribute. And it's my controller, which refers to this my controller. And as long as the controllers match, then it knows what is the text. In this case, it's just a hello world. That's a scope. It's just a glue, view, and a controller. Scope is what ties it together. Model, it's the same code. Model is just a value that you store in $scope or $.scope. That's your model, basically. Nothing else. A controller is a function that is used to augment the scope. So whatever you see $.scope, you're pretty much inside of a controller. So if you need to set the $.scope, you got to do it in the controller. So you should use controllers for setting up the initial state of $.scope object or adding behavior to $.scope object. A good example is form submission. You'll have like submit form methods, and you define it in the controller. You should not use it to manipulate DOM. That's what the directives are for. You should not use it to filter output, because that's what the filters are for. You should not share code or state across the controllers, because that's what the services are for. You should not manage the life cycle of other components either, because that's just going to create a complicated mess, and it's going to be very hard to test your application. Data binding. Data binding is just a simple mechanism to synchronize your data between the model and the view. For example, you have $scope.name. It's set to AngularJS, which will be displayed in this input field. Whenever you change the input field, it changes the scope object. Whenever you change the scope object, it changes the input field. And there's a picture up top where it says it's a template. And once it renders, whenever changes to the view, updates the model. Changes to the model, updates the view. So it's like a life cycle. Like one thing changes the other thing. If the other thing changes, it changes the other thing. So it's basically a synchronization principle. A directive is another component of Angular. It extends HTML with custom attributes or elements. For example, you have alert here. Alert, it's an element. It looks like an HTML tag, but it's not. It's something that only Angular at this moment can understand, because assuming we have defined alert directive. And what it can do is just print like a bootstrap success message, which is like a couple of lines of code. Or you can have something more complicated, like password strength. Whenever you type something in your password field, it will tell you how complicated your password is. Like this is similar to Dropbox and Stripe, where you have an indicator with circles how strongly the password is. So this is part of a directive job. So as a directive, if you're familiar with MVC model, directive is somewhere in the middle between a model and a view. Here's why. You have a model here. This is your password. This is lives on your $.scope, for example. And you have a view. So whenever the model changes, the view has to update. So that's what I mean. It's sitting between a model and a view. And that's why it's not really MVC framework. It's more like MVVM framework or MVP framework. Depends on how you define it. And that's why also Angular doesn't call itself MVC anymore, just MV whatever. So yeah, I just want to say something here. Sure, you can do this so much quicker with a few lines of jQuery, but we have to use, if you're using Angular, we have to do this thing the Angular way. Angular stresses the points of separations of concerns and testability in order for you to be able to build scalable web applications. So you can test them better and work with a lot of teammates and without having to look at this giant mess of jQuery code and they have no idea like what's going on there. Services. Services are reusable business logic object that is wired together using dependency injection. I'll explain what it is in a minute. Services fall into three categories. There's a service called service, there's a factory, and there's a provider. I'm not going to go into detail with the difference between each. There's a Stack Overflow post up here that goes into great detail of, cannot see it here, but it goes into great detail of what the difference between them. Basically, just use a factory for everything. So you have, for example, a factory here called auth, and a factory has to return an object. For example, you have sign in, sign out, and current user. Those properties on the object. So then you can, that's what it is, it depends on injection. You can go to your controller, you can say auth, and then you have this, you basically have access to this auth service, and you can call auth sign in or auth sign out on this. And how does Angular know about this auth? Because the names match and because it's a service, Angular will inject it for you. You just type the proper name in exactly the same, with uppercase if it's uppercase, and it will do it for you. It can be injected in controllers, also filters, directives, or another service. A service is just another Angular component. You create a service, you add it to your index.html, and just like any other script. And then you can inject it into your controllers or even other services, which is what's pretty interesting. This is one of my latest modules that I've written, Satellizer, and I'm using a factory, which includes a custom $.q $HTTP services plus my own utility and pop-up. So you can inject other services within a service. This is a simple Instagram service that I just did for the demo purposes. You have Instagram factory, and it has an object that returns get popular images, and inside of your controller, you inject this Instagram service here, and then you do Instagram.getPopularImages, and whenever it's received, you print out to the console all the images from Instagram. So what is a dependency injection? Angular's dependency injection, I think, is explained better by what it does rather than as a concept like what is dependency injection, because that's, I'm sure you can Wikipedia it. But basically allows you to write code that without worrying where $.scope comes from. For example, you have a controller and you have $.scope here, but where is it coming from? Angular injects it for you using what's called dependency injection. And there's a link below that explains in great detail of how it works in Angular. And I actually like this. This is directly from the NG Newsletter article. It says, dependency injection in Angular is what allows us to write our Angular code without worrying about the order in which our code is loaded. So it allows us to use the same syntax across Angular components and not concern ourselves with how dependencies arrive. It gives us the ability to write tests efficiently and not worry about how to separate production components from those in testings. It's a very powerful mechanism, and that's like probably one of my favorite features in Angular. Templates, that's I have a couple more templates, filters, and routes, I think. So a template is basically HTML with Angular sugar there. Like those curly braces up there. So whenever you define something on the controller, for example, you have $.scope genres, which is an array of strings. You can use ng repeat directives in your template, and you can iterate over them. It's like a for loop basically in the JavaScript, and you can iterate over those elements in your $.scope.genres and print them out using this double curly braces, and that's going to give you the list of all the genres. So routing, routing is basically everybody needs routing if you're building an application with pages. And a route provider, it maps URLs to controllers and templates. So you see here you have localhost 3000 and you have /settings. Basically, when it sees /settings, okay, I know there's a /settings here in my configuration for the provider. So I know I need to execute settings HTML. That's the template I'm using. And this is the controller I'm using, settings controller. So it loads those mini templates inside of your index HTML. Depends on the route you go to. And it's no longer part of Angular anymore, unfortunately, so you have to get it separately. It's AngularJS, which is it's part of its own official website. Alternatively, you can also take a look at the UI router, which is a great alternative. And this is if you need something more complex, like nested views or nested states. Filters. Filter basically formats the value of an expression for display to the user. So they can be used in templates, controllers, or services. I typically use them in templates. And this is an example of a filter. It's called a Slugify filter, and basically, if you haven't heard what Slugify does, is it takes a string and puts them in lowercase and puts dashes and strips all the extra characters. So it returns a function, and this input here, the first parameter, is this word right here, AngularJS NYC Meetup. So you take that word and you return it, and that's going to print AngularJS NYC Meetup with all lowercase within dashes. And to use filter, you basically use some expression or string, pipe, and then name of the filter. Filters can be actually more complicated. They can pass like parameters, they can pass multiple parameters, they can chain them, and they can get more complex as you go along. So if you have not paid attention at all, here's basically a brief summary of what everything does in, I guess, in layman terms, I call them, because it's a lot of if you read documentation about each one of those components, it goes into great detail, and it can be overwhelming. If you just want to remember, like it's the first time, this is a great, I guess, way to remember it. So routing is basically for navigating pages. Templates is to display your UI. The view is just render template. Depends injection is what's used for loading modules and services. And the service is a place to do like heavy lifting stuff like AJAX server requests, or if you're using like auth service, or there's like so many different services. Directive is just behavior abstraction, like we've seen like a password strength, or maybe password confirm directive. Data binding is just a mechanism to keep something in sync with the UI. Model is whatever the stuff that lives on your $.scope object, and the scope is what I call glue between a controller and a template. Whatever you put on $.scope is going to be displayed in the template. Whenever the template updates, it updates this $.scope too. And the controller is basically where you put the $.scope. Filter returns a subset of data or formats the output. By format the output, I mean like Slugify filter I just showed you, or return a subset of data, which we'll do in our TV show tracker. You have a list of episodes, and you want to filter like by name, for example. You want to start typing A, and it's going to give you TV shows starting with A. So this is a section. I named this section called Thinking in Angular because I think many developers who are coming from a jQuery background have a hard time adjusting to Angular. So this is a quick section that will show you a few examples of doing things the jQuery way and the Angular way. So what if you have an Angular app and you have some jQuery plugins, right? And so what should you do? You should write a directive. So directive will be basically, so here's I guess what a directive looks like. So directive returns, and then this restrict A here refers, this is going to be an attribute directive. Link, what is link property? From Angular docs, it says directives that want to modify the DOM typically use the link option. Basically, whatever you put inside link function will be run after the template is compiled. It's kind of like initializing a jQuery plugin after DOM is ready. So when a link is initialized, this element will refer to this div toolbar, like this whole element. And then you just plain jQuery, like $symbol, and then you instantiate this toolbar, which is the same as this toolbar. And you pass in that string with this object string, and then just do eval to put it back to the object. So that's just an example of basically whenever you have jQuery plugins, usually you should write a directive for it. However simple it is, just write a directive for it. Data binding. So I'm not sure if you've used this before, but I have definitely. So when you have like UL and you would just want to append some messages, you want to make a request to the server, get the server data, and just append it. And this is how you would do it. You would literally use $append. There's a better way in Angular. Because of dependency injection, what you can do is use ng-repeat and then just display all the elements from the scope. But you know that whenever the scope updates, it will update the UI. So in this case, we'll make HTTP request to /messages, and whenever it receives, it just pushes to the $.scope, and that will update the UI for you. This is also, I guess, a good point. DOM is not a data layer. So in Angular, we have a separate model layer that lives on $.scope. It's completely independent from the view. So what I'm saying is here, like before, we used to have like a lot of data inside of a template. You have like data tags, and you just put a lot of data in your presentation logic. And that just makes it so hard to test and just the reason about the application. So basically, Angular is saying we have a separation of concerns. Put your data inside of your models. Let the presentation be just a presentation. So as a result, it gives like you have this data binding, you have separation of concerns, and it's much easier to test. And here's again, just to drive the point through, is we have controllers. It's a glue between the services and the views. Controllers should be very small and should be very lean. They should have very minimum logic. You inject the service and you pass it into the template. And the template only should present it. It shouldn't do anything else. A service is where you put reusable business logic components. And whenever you need to modify the DOM in any way or shape, the user directs us for that. Everything in Angular has a place. And if you want to write maintainable, large-scale applications, you have to separate concerns. And if you're writing small Angular apps, then I think it's a good habit to get into to separate the concerns right now. So promises, I think it's not a very introduction topic, and I know this is introduction to AngularJS today. But I still want to talk about it because I think it's very important. It's a core concept of Angular, and I'm sure if you visit like $CCP before, it has like success and error or then and catch. But how does it actually work? Like how do they do those promises? This is a code example where you have a pop-up class, and then it has a single method called open. So what I want to do is I want to instantiate this pop-up class, and I want to call open. But instead of having a callback here, for example, I have this URL, comma, function, which will be, it's a callback function. We've probably seen it before many times. I want to use promises. I want to use like .then instead. So this is my first time I've used promises before in my life, and I can only give you a high-level overview of how they work. You basically start with the $q.defer. You have an instance of a deferred object, and at the end of this function, you return it. This .then will not execute up until you either resolve it or reject it. In my case, I'm not rejecting it. I'm only resolving when you press like OK here, when you accept, when you authorize your Facebook app, and only then will it be resolved. But you can do the same thing for rejecting. So once you resolve, then this then will be executed and will print out the code. So it'll just hang there. It's kind of like a callback. And this is not a very good example because I'm only using a single then. But when you have like multiple callbacks, then promises really like start to pay off. Okay. So here's a quick recap of what we have done so far. We have covered like what is AngularJS. I've told you about what is what is trying to solve, like why are we using it. I've talked about Angular anatomy and what each component is and what it is used for. I've talked about how to think in Angular, especially if you're coming from a jQuery background. The next section, we'll talk about Angular best practices. So whenever you're defining a module, you should prefer to use getter syntax or setter syntax. Instead of like creating an app variable, just use angular.module.app. And because the problem is here is var app is now a global variable. So the only way to get around is you have to put this inside of a function closure. But then that's just extra code. So this is the second approach is actually more used in Angular docs, and I think that's the preferred way to do this. So the second is a product structure. You should never put all the controllers inside of controllers.js or all the filters inside of filters.js. At least separate them by folders, or alternatively separate them by features. So you have like admin and put all the templates, controllers, and directs inside this admin folder. I personally prefer to have this second approach, separate by folders, at least for the scale that I'm building. And here's an example of a screenshot. If you have used Angular, then you're probably aware of like this is how you should do. You should annotate your services, like whatever you inject, you should annotate it, because once you minify it, it's going to completely break. I say you shouldn't do that because there are a lot of cases where where you have like more than two, like 5 or 6 or 7 of them. And I actually did have this case where like you can forget one of them and not put into the functional. For example, you put like 7 of them in function, but you only put 6 of them in this array notation. And they have to be in exactly the same order. If you mess up the order, it's not going to work anymore. And you're going to spend hours like trying to figure out like why is it not working, and you have no idea why. It's not going to tell you why, at least. Well, it will, but it's going to be very obscure. What you should do is write it like this. Not only get the 2-space indentation back, you also get a much cleaner function, much cleaner the code here. And what you should use instead of using gulp ng annotate or grunt ng annotate, and this will basically do it for you automatically. So you annotate it first, you run through the gulp or grunt, and then you can minify it safely. This is also a preferred way to, like if you have a like built-in services like scope or root scope, you should put them first before you put like other services, your custom services, just so it's better visible like when you look at the code. Okay, it was a pretty short section. Next, I'll talk about Angular as JavaScript best practices, and some of them are my own, I guess, practices. Some of them are my own opinion, so you don't have to agree with it. But a lot of them are more or less, I guess, acceptable at this point. So here's the general tips. You should always be consistent when writing code. Also, follow a style guide, which is referring to step 1. That means don't like mix and match spaces or tabs or have semicolons in one place, not have semicolons in another place. Be consistent throughout your code. Follow a style guide like Google, Airbnb, or Idiomatic.js. There's many style guides. Just follow one style guide at least. Your code should be clean and readable in a way that, like, you're not writing code for machine to execute and just run and never touch it again. You're writing code for other people on your team, people like for yourself, or people who read it. Especially if you put it on GitHub, other people will try to read the code. So it has to be readable. Use strict equality instead of like double equal, triple equal. Use semicolons. Use spaces over tabs. This is my personal opinion. The Boolean instead of a like when I first saw double exclamation mark, I had no idea what it is. I mean, now I know it's basically you take an object and you make it true or false. But at the time when I saw it, I have like, what is this? So I think using Boolean to do the same thing is more explicit in this way. But you know. Next is don't overuse the comments, and I think it refers to number 3. It should be clean and readable. When I'm reading source code, I'm not reading comments. I want to read the source code. So if all fails, like try to make your code self-explanatory, but if all fails, then use the comments. Keep your code dry, means don't repeat yourself. So here's an example screenshot. This is from the library again. Like I'm using a single authenticate method, and I'm just passing a provider name as a string. I could have done like 6 or 7 different methods, like signing with Facebook, Google, GitHub, whatever. And I'm only using a single method here. I'm just passing a string. Instead of having 7 or 8 different functions, I only have a single one of them, basically to do the same thing. Next is, well, basically number 10 refers to don't try to make a code perfect. It's gonna, like, just get it to work first, and you can optimize it later. Use a linter tool, JSHint, JSLint, doesn't matter, probably JSHint better. And it will give you those messages like missing semicolon or missing parentheses, you know, just basic stuff. So if you're using an IDE like WebStorm, it's going to be built in, so you don't have to get it separately. And last one is keeping global variables to the minimum. You'll have some library or some code in your project where you will override one of your variables. It will happen, especially if it grows. So at least keep it to the minimum of like 1, no more than 1 probably, and if you can avoid that. This is a code complexity. It uses a complexity report to evaluate the complexity of and maintainability of your application. And there is one for gulp, grunt, or as a standalone. I think it's cool, but you should also take it with a grain of salt that sometimes it's trying to satisfy the complexity metric just for the sake of that. It will actually make, ironically, your code more complex because it will tell you to like, this is too complicated. Okay, let's refactor it. Let's make it smaller, make it smaller, make it smaller, and to the point where you cannot even read it because, I mean, it satisfies, like it's no longer complex, but it's very hard to read it now. Test coverage, I've discovered this just recently. I knew about it, but I didn't know how to use it. And it's a Karma coverage plugin. It's part of a Karma test runner. So you just add this plugin, and when you run the test, it will generate this HTML report for you. It will tell you how much of your code is covered. Like all the red lines means the code hasn't been covered, and the green, the code has been tested and covered. What else? Okay, that's it for the JavaScript best practices. Next step is the big picture. So here's the architecture of the TV show tracker app. So it's similar to what I showed before. You have a database, you have a server and a client. All they do is just talk through the JSON API, through the JSON. MongoDB talks with the JSON back to Node and back to Angular, and that's all we do. We don't serve pages anymore. We just serve JSON objects. For example, here's first you do is go to the server and you get the JSON, and you take this JSON object, you go to Angular, do some Angular magic, take this JSON, render it or whatever, and it's displayed on the page. So that's basically a three-step process. You have JSON object, put it in Angular, and display it. In other words, like I said again, we're not rendering the pages from the server. We're doing it completely on the client side. This is, I guess, a relevant self-promotion plug. So the reason why I built this satellizer authentication module is, not sure if you've seen it on Hacker yesterday, but the reason I built it is because when I was writing this TV show tracker app, I looked at all the AngularJS authentication searches on Google for like 3 pages. I couldn't find a single one that I liked, and most of them were either too complicated or it's not something I was looking for. So I knew how to do something about it. I just had no idea where to start. I was barely using Angular at that point, and I don't know how to build a custom Angular module. So after like hours of reading source code, reading tutorials, learning about Auth 1 and 2.0, the flow, and the entire thing, I built it, posted on Hacker News, and it received a pretty good feedback. It is trending on GitHub, so let's see. Okay, so that is done. We're going to go to live coding right now, but before we go to live coding, I want to show you the thing that we're actually going to build. Okay, let's jump back. So here's a show tracker app. Not sure if you can see it. Cannot see it. Yeah. It's not extending it to the screen. Only does for the PowerPoint, not for this full screen.
Maybe you close the Hangout.
No, I didn't close it. It's still open. That's back. Okay, it's kind of small, so let me try to increase it. If it doesn't work, then it doesn't. It's okay. Okay, that doesn't work, I guess. I'm not sure. Yeah, you can see it here. So here's the demo of the application we're going to build for whatever the remaining time is. It's basically just a list of TV shows up here, and there's like the place where you can add it here, and you can filter it by genre, you can filter it by name. You can click on one of the TV shows, it will load it, and I'll show you the information about it. You can subscribe to it. I'll show you when the TV show starts, and it shows you all the episodes that are coming up. And here's the thing I just added recently, which is this sign-in effect, animation effect, when you click on certain pages. And a cool thing here is the sign-up, for example, here. You can start typing password, and it will show you the password strength, which is a pretty naive approach to do password strengths, but just for demo purposes. And here it will tell you if email is available or not. I don't have any emails yet, so it's going to say available. But basically, if it's not unavailable, I will tell you underneath the email it's already taken by making a request to the server and getting the data, like is it available or not. So basically, it'll give you live feedback from the server. Okay, so that's it. Let me just close this and we'll go to IntelliJ. Okay. All right, and let me just go to CD projects. Second. Okay, so it's a blank page at the moment. Okay, let's see. First, we'll start by going to, let's see, it's so big here. Yeah, can't see much here. Huh? Okay, so it's basically a simple HTML at the moment. It has the regular stuff like the head and the body, and you have all the scripts at the bottom here. They are kind of empty, not really, but they just have like definitions at the moment. They don't do anything. So the next thing we need is the nav bar. This nav bar is just a basic Bootstrap nav bar. It has a couple of links up here and has a few directives. This is the part we're responsible. Like if you're signed in, you want to display logout. If you're not signed in, you want to display sign in and like sign up, for example, those links. And those data match routes, they are just part of this Angular strap directive to do this navbar. And the reason I'm using it instead of just plain navbar is because like when you go to like different routes, it will make set it to active state for you for free automatically. See. Okay, so that's what it is so far. Last thing we need is we need this ng view. And okay, so I remember how I told you about the route provider and when you have like those routes set up in the beginning. So whenever you click on those routes, it loads the template URL, one of those templates that you have, for example, the settings template. It's going to append it into this ng view. So they work sort of hand to hand. Whatever you specify in route provider will be loaded into this ng view. And the class here, I'm using it for animations. I don't want to animate every single page, so I'm only animating only like sign up and login. So if you're not passing anything on $.scope, or if you're not setting a page class on $.scope, then nothing is going to animate because you're not adding any classes basically. Okay, so that's the index.html page. Doesn't do anything at the moment. So let's go to app.js. App.js is typically your main application file. This is where you set up the module. For example, this is my app, and then this is an array of strings. Each one of the strings is a module that you have referenced in the index.html file. The routes, animate, messages, and so on. And the config is a special phase in Angular which gets run before the application loads. So this is a place where you set up the providers. One of those providers is a route provider. And here's all the routes that we're going to need. And basically, here's a slash shows login sign up. So whenever you're going to log in, it's going to log in, take this login view and use the login controller to handle that view. Okay, let me go to so next is a home HTML. Home HTML will be our homepage, and it's just a container. Remember those filters, like letters and genres, and that's what it's used for. It's basically renders those elements from your controller into your template. And second, we need is to display those shows. So we have a container. It's a lot of code, but it's all like Bootstrap code. Just a lot of like panels and headings and containers. And you have links here, and you have images, and that information about show episodes. Whatever you see here in curly braces, show that name. That means we have a controller. Well, we don't have it yet, but we're supposed to have a controller that has a show object or shows object, and that's what we're going to use in our template. Like right now, it's not going to display anything because we don't have anything yet in the controller. So, and that's where we're going to go next. We will open our controller. This is a controller, main controller, responsible for displaying the home page. And here we have $.scope, which we will use it to put the our model on dollar.scope and use it in our homepage. And the show, which is what we'll use as a service that we're going to use to retrieve the data about TV shows. So the first is, this is I guess I put them as a constant here. Basically, I just hard-coded all those names and alphabet letters up here, and a heading title. So, and what else? Next is we have show.query. That means we have a show service, and I'm using query to get all the shows from the server and put them on shows object. So when I go to my template in my home here, I have ng repeat here. I'm saying for all the shows on my scope, render them. So each show refers to each show in my shows array. So probably 12, 15, however many shows we're going to get from the server. And the last thing is it's methods to handle filters here, filter by alphabet or filter by genre. And those are just, this is where I remember like what you should use controller for. Controller should be used to initialize $scope, and controller should be used to add some logic, like methods here, for example, like filter by alphabet here, which you can call it in your templates. So let's create, not create, but let's go to show service. And what we need here is, it's very, very simple. Like instead of using HTTP to query like 4 or 5 different routes, I'm using $resource module, and it's perfect for RESTful APIs. So you just have basically defined like a single line of code, and what it does for you is it maps all those URLs for you automatically using, for example, if you use a get, it will get like get API/shows, because that's what we define up here. If you use query, which we're going to use in a controller here, it will get and says is array true, which means it's not going to get a single show, it's going to get multiple shows. And you can also use remove, delete, and save. So that is for free for you by using $resource. So I can just, it's going to be super simple, just like a one-line service here. And that returns those methods for you to use up here, like show.query. So let's jump in here real quick and see what we have. So you have TV shows. Here's the filter that I was talking about earlier. You can start typing something and we'll filter them by whatever you're typing in. And that's using ng model directive and using a filter, built-in Angular filter to filter by whatever you start typing in. Okay, let's go to the add page for this right here. Let's create add HTML. And what this does is basically just a simple form to add a TV show. Here's a few things to note. There are a couple of things. First of all, it's a form. That means we cannot just submit it, because that's going to like take us redirect to a separate, like some other URL, like with traditional web pages. We have ng submit. That basically intercepts the submit request and handles it by the server. In this case, it's add show method defined in your controller. Sorry, not server, it's controller. We have an add JS controller, and then the add show is going to be defined up there. Second is ng class. And this is a kind of weird syntax here, but has error is one of the bootstrap classes that takes this form and makes it red, like highlights outlines with a red color. And it's basically saying here, if the form is invalid, means if it's like not valid, in this case it's empty, then you add this has error class. So it becomes, invalid form, and therefore has this has error class. The other thing here is ng if. Okay, so I'm using ng messages up here, and ng messages is a recent addition to Angular 1.3 beta 7 or 8, and it basically shows you, allows you to show those messages. For example, email is invalid or TV show name is required. And I'll show it to you in a second, but I need to make a controller before it's going to work. So if I go to controller here, so what it does is it has this add show, which is defined up here, right? When I just added here, add show. When you submit the form, call this add show function. In our controller, we have this add show defined in $scope, and what it does is it calls this service called show, which we defined earlier, and calls .save, which is part of $resource, and we're just passing the show name. That's it. And then a lot of this code is just doing the alert message. So let's just try one of them. Let's see. So it's a TV show name has been added. And what you see here, this animation here, that didn't work really well because of the screen, I guess, but it's pretty smooth. So what it does is I'm using ng-animate to display it and then just fade it down, fade in, fade it out. And I'm using for that $alert, which is again part of the Angular Strap module, which you can find online. It's kind of similar like Bootstrap UI, so it gives you those Bootstrap components for free, and you can use those like alerts, tooltips, popovers. Here's probably something you've noticed here, $promise, and I actually didn't know what it was. So that save here from resource, it only works with callbacks. So you have to have two callbacks. One is for success, one is for the error. And I was going to use promises, so you have to use basically $promise to invoke original $HTTP promises, because $HTTP can work with promises. It has success, error, then and catch. But save doesn't have it, so we use this $promise syntax up here to do this for you. And set pristine and the show name is basically just a code to reset the form and get it back to normal. Okay, so what do we have here so far? We have added the home page. We've added the filters up here. We have a couple of TV shows. We've added the TV show up here, so we have add page now. But if we go to one of the pages, it's not going to work. So for that, let me just take a brief detour from that because we will need to use this filter here. It's called a from now filter. Maybe you've seen it in the beginning. So TV show starts in 4 hours or 2 days from now. So what this filter does is utilizes moment.js. It's a library to do data or date and calendar stuff. And I'm using from now here part of a moment. So that allows me to use this pipe from now automatically in my templates. And that's going to give me the proper format of the data, of the date. So let's go back to detail.js, which is our controller responsible for handling the detail view, which means the view that is responsible for each TV show. I'm starting with controller because template is more complicated. It's a lot of HTML there. So what this controller does is it gets one of the TV shows by ID, and once it's loaded, it just sets it on that scope, and it has a couple of methods here: subscribe, unsubscribe, and resubscribe. Because you have to check all those cases. If you subscribe, then you have to display a different button. If you're not subscribed, you have to display a different button. And if you're not logged in, that's a completely different case. And this next episode, this is basically tells you if there's a next episode, it will tell you when it's going to be. And yeah, this again, we're showing a new date, and you will see it in a sec once I build the template. So it's 3 parts. The first part, let me close all others. The first part here is just a panel, and that's the top part. And again, sorry about this lot of code. It's just a bootstrap and can't really avoid it. And you just display an image here, and this is the more complicated part here. This is saying that if the user is, if you're authenticated, then display subscribe, unsubscribe. Otherwise, it says this blue button here, log in to subscribe. That's all it does. And all those other methods here we have defined inside of the controller here. ng-show is what you use to display it or not display it. It's similar to ng-if. Basically, the difference is ng-if will not even put it on your HTML. ng-show will just hide it for you. It's still going to be, if you inspect it, it's still going to be there, as far as I understand. Okay. And then there's it shows about if it's containing, if the name, and the calendar dates and the status. The next part would be the filter, which says the next episode starts, and this is where I'm saying I'm using this filter from now, using pipe from now, and uses moment.js under the hood, and it will tell you this nice pretty date instead. And last part is this. This is just a list of all episodes, and again, I'm going through the all episodes, which is an array, using ng-repeat directive. And I'm just iterating through all of them, and I'm printing out titles, the descriptions about it, and when it's starting, when it's airing usually, overview, and so on. Let me refresh the browser. Click on one of the shows. So yeah, here's the first part we did, the image, the information about it, the title, the description. Since we're not logged in, it says log in to subscribe right now. But if we were to be logged in, it will be displayed the subscribe, unsubscribe. And then there's episode information. So far so good, right? We have a homepage. We can click on any of the TV shows and displays those shows. So at the moment we cannot subscribe and we cannot like log in or sign up. So okay, let's do the sign up first. So I'm gonna go to sign up HTML and create first part. So this a lot of code. So the first part here is basically creates this form and doesn't really do anything at the moment. So this form has a lot of code, but most of it is just ng messages. Again, like your email is required, or your email is invalid, or some other like your email is already taken. So a lot of those are just messages you have to handle in your HTML using this ng message directive. But that's about it. I don't think there's like anything special, except here's a unique email. It's a directive that we're about to make, and password strengths. That's going to tell the strength of the password. Everything else here is really like nothing interesting up here. And maybe the ng disabled. That's just going to keep the button disabled until the form is valid. In other words, you have filled out all the forms properly. Okay, let's see, what else? Okay, so we need to go to sign up controller. And this is our controller to handle that. So the sign up controller, it uses auth service, which we haven't created yet, but it uses auth service to call this method called sign up. And all it does is passes in name, email, and password from using this $.scope, display name, email, and password. So how does this like work actually? You have display name and email. Where is it coming from? It's coming from all these fields. For each input we have said there's a ng model called email, or ng model called display name, ng model called password. So by setting it on ng model, you are able to call it from within the controller using like $.scope, whatever the ng model name is. And you just wrap it in an object and you send it into the sign up. Sign up, whatever it does, it just does something to it and sends it to the server. There's I think one more, which is an animation part, and this is where I'm setting the class to do fade zoom, which is my custom CSS class I've defined in my style sheets. And so if we refresh the page now, okay, let's try this. Okay, so far so good. All right, let me just jump in real quick to the directive. I think that's more interesting part. And so this is a unique email directives. So what I'm saying here is I want to use it as an attribute called unique email. That's why I'm saying restrict A. And the second thing I'm saying is I need the ng model. The reason for that is because I need to access the value of whatever you're typing in, because that's part of the ng model. And if you're not going to say require ng model, then we don't get access to the whatever email that you're trying to type in. So the link, this is the function that we're actually going to do execution of the code. And that's where we do the HTTP request to the server. So basically, on blur, in other words, whenever you like typing something, press tab, that's a blur effect. So whenever you have like typing something and you tab away, you want to send a request to the HTTP server called the API users. That's my custom route on the server, passing this email, and it will tell you basically if it's valid or not valid. If it's not valid, it will tell you it's not valid, and you just display it, it's not valid. Set validity here, unique equals whatever, true or false. On key op, like as soon as you start typing, it's basically just going to reset it. And this is just a cleanup code up here. And the other interesting directive is called password strength. It is kind of brute forcey and variable. It looks very hacky because I didn't know how to do it better, and that's the best way I could do it to replicate the same, I guess, the same effect that Dropbox and the Stripe has. So what they do is they have those circles, and depends on like, well, I'm using the length, but it's a very stupid approach to use that because password strength, uses pretty complicated algorithms to determine whether it's a strong or weak password. But I'm using here just strength based on the number of letters you have. So let's see. Yeah, it's not very nice code and probably looks very ugly. But essentially, what I'm doing is I have those circles. And I'm getting where is it? Here's the template. This is the spans up here, each span. And so assuming we already have the styles for the CSS, this is our template. So I'm grabbing all those children, all those spans, and I'm just assigning them to each one of those variables. And whenever you press something, you calculate using this for loop, and you calculate like the length of the password. If it's 3 or 4 or 5, so it's gonna keep updating every single time. It's not very efficient, but it just get it to work. That was the what I had to do, and I'm just setting style directly using the HTML style background color, not even Angular, not even jQuery, just straight up style, changing the colors from that, and that's what it does there. Let's see. So yeah, there we go. So password is required. That's part of ng messages. You start typing something, it will tell you the strength of the password, and it's gonna just change it. And so this is the model. This is the view. To solve this problem, we created a directive. I think we need also a real quick login. I'm running out of time here, but let's see if I can do it. So this is our login view, and it's pretty much the same thing as a sign-up view. It actually seem more simple because it doesn't have any directives. It's just a simple form. So otherwise, yeah, it's exactly the same. There's really no need to explain it one more time. And so I'll just go to login, and login again calls auth to do the Facebook login, just plain login and Google login. Let's see if I can demo it. So yeah, there we go. So there was the sign with Facebook. Right now, if we can click on it, it's not going to work because we don't have auth servers to handle all that. And otherwise, yeah, it's just a simple form, does the login, and that's about it. Yeah, it doesn't work because probably it shows the error somewhere in console because it says, oh, you don't have a login method yet. So let me go to auth. So auth, I'm not going to explain everything just because I have to save time and because most of it has nothing to do with Angular. Most of it has to do with how Facebook SDK works or how Google SDK works. And to be honest, like I'm not even going to use this anymore because of the Satellizer, which is more general purpose authentication library. And I might upgrade it in the future. So let me just type it in. I'm using token-based authentication instead of cookies. So I'm a server is going to send me this token. I'm going to save it to local storage. I'm going to parse this token, and JSON Web Token is basically it's a spec that says I have this string. It's kind of like access token, but it has a meaning to it. It's a string that has 3 parts: the headers, the payloads, and the signature. What we're interested in is a payload, which is the middle part, and that's what we're doing the splitting here and decoding it. That's going to give us the user object because we have encoded it on the server side. We have put the email information about the user information inside of this payload, inside of our token. The next is loading the Facebook SDK. This is to load it asynchronously, basically, in our code. Weird. So this is a Google SDK, again, just to load it asynchronously from our code. Again, you see, it doesn't look very pretty, and this has nothing with Angular presentation, but I have to do this just to show that to demonstrate the sign-in. So since it's a factory, we have to return an object at the very end, and this object will have the Facebook login. Again, this is just like using Facebook API. Connect it, go to the server, and create a token, and then go back to the home page and say, cheers, you have successfully signed in. The other part will need Google. And the reason I don't cover it because you see Google now does it differently, so that's a different library, and they have a kind of different process. The only process is the same as at the end. You store the token, you log in the user, I guess, so that the current user object to whatever the user information from the payload of the token, and needs to go back to the home page, and again, you do the alert message. And what we need is a login, which takes an email and password. And we need the sign up. So sign up and login. They're very simple. Basically, they do. And my time is almost up. So let me just finish this real quick. So you have a post request to sign up, and you have a post request to sign in. You just basically pass the object that we have inside our form, like email, name, and a password. And last one is, I believe, logout. A cool thing about logout with a token authentication is you don't really need to go to the server to log out. because they just clear the token on the local storage, and that's about it. Then clear the object of the user, and that means that's it. You're logged out. There's really like not much else to do. Let's see if I can demonstrate this. So it logged me in, and it says a successfully signed in. And now there's a log out button right here. We can log out here again. Go to login again, and let me just quickly demonstrate something. There's a problem, I guess, saying it's still saying log out, but I'm not really logged out. I'm not really logged in anymore. Let's try this. Let me go back to sign up. And just want to check the email validity. So try it again. Okay, so this is just a demonstration of an example of a directive that says a unique email. So whenever you type the email that is already taken on a database because somebody else has already used it, and it will tell you the email is already taken using this directive that we have written. So I think I'm going to just jump in back to the slides. And the only thing I missed is the subscription part, which is not really interesting anymore. The sign up and login and what I have done so far is probably what's more interesting. Let's see if I can go back to slides. Okay. Let's see, go back to the end. So here's some learning resources for you. This is not a complete list, but it is something. Let's see. Those links are to newsletter for Angular, like JavaScript weekly newsletter. That's probably one of my favorite newsletters. There's an NG newsletter for AngularJS. There's this video for that's the one I posted earlier, like YouTube video that explains like Angular in depth for like 60 minutes. There's a cheat sheet, and not really about Angular. Eloquent JavaScript 2.0, which is a book that has been recently released. It's one of my favorite JavaScript books, and if you're just starting out with JavaScript, I highly recommend to read it. Another great book is Speaking JavaScript, which both of those links are free to read, so you can go online and read about them. So my closing notes for this talk is, I just want to say that like programming hasn't always been like very easy for me. Like my first semester at college, I kind of almost dropped out. Like I switched from computer science because this programming was so difficult for me. And I remember like I was doing one of the Java homework assignments, and I was stuck on the part where it's like I have to do if statements and for loops, and it took like 4 hours to do one of the homework assignments, which I can do like now in 5 minutes, but at the time it was extremely difficult for some reason. And that's why I almost switched to something like another major after the first semester. But I did persist, I did keep going, and I'm really glad I did it. So if you're somebody who has not much programming but wants to know more about programming, I want to say that it gets better eventually. So just basically don't give up, and it will eventually become better. So as far as for the Angular talk, you have seen what we can do with Angular so far. We built a CV show tracker, although pretty rushed. But basically, the best way to learn Angular is to do something. Not read, not watch screencasts, not watch anything else. Just do it, just build it. Like coding is the best practice. And that's really like the best way to learn anything. So I highly encourage you to go home and decide on a project that you want to build. A small project that you can fit in addition to your work or school. And just work on it. Maybe slowly, but keep going at it. And eventually, once you get in the habit, you will be able to you will basically transition from this barrier where this, like for me, Angular, I've known about this like since 2012. I had no idea about it. Like, okay, I know about it, but I don't know how to use it. Every time I look at documentation, it's just so much, and it's pretty scary. But once you decide, sit down, I'm gonna build this, and eventually, like this tutorial, I had to learn as I went along. So that's building something is really like the best way to learn anything. So that's my speech to you. Thank you. Oh yeah, the questions.
So, do you have any questions?
The question was, are the slides going to be available? Yes. I will post them on the Meetup in about 10 minutes.
I have a really basic question.
Yeah, talk to the mic.
Sure, yeah. So you mentioned that Angular is for single-page applications, or it can be used for single-page applications. I'm just wondering, especially with the client-side routing and other stuff that's possible in Angular, to what extent does that capability of client-side work take the weight off the back end?
If I understand correctly, in a single page app, what is, I guess, percentage-wise, or maybe just like how much of it is done on the client side?
But for this, how much of the work were you able to transfer from the server to the client?
I would say most of it. I mean, because it's not just the UI, it's like all the logic and presentation and JavaScript. So like definitely it's more than half. And as you put more logic on the server, on the client in Angular, the server is just like, it becomes smaller and smaller. So I would say I haven't counted, but I would imagine it's more on leaning towards the Angular side.
Question here.
There's a question.
Yes, can you talk a little bit about the backend works you have to do to get this project working, such as database-wise, and how you get your REST services, or how do you get access to those services in the first place, authentication-wise?
Can you tell me about which services do you mean?
Well,
exactly?
for instance, how do you get those movies in there? Like if I had to do a live
I see.
demo of this.
Okay, so I had to skip that part because this is an Angular talk. I didn't want to talk about the Node.js stuff because it's pretty in-depth too. But what I had to do is I had to query a remote API, tvdb.org or .com, I don't remember exactly. I had to query that server, get XML, parse XML to JSON, save it to the database, and then from client side, I'm able to query the database and get that information. But it's all part of the tutorial I posted earlier on my website. You can look at the tutorial and we'll go step by step from the very, very beginning, from nothing, from a simple folder, and it will explain all the steps that you need to take to do this.
We have time for one more. Yep.
In the beginning, you mentioned that you started with other libraries or frameworks like Ember and Backbone. Were there any features that you missed when you started working with Angular?
Honestly, not really. Like Backbone, was my first framework, and it was just so verbose, and you have to do everything yourself. You have to instantiate the views yourself. Ember was very nice, but it also suffers from over-engineering, that it's pretty complex to get started. Once I explored Angular, I was like, okay, I love Angular, and I stayed there for a while. But my next option, I guess, would be to try React and see where that goes.
We have to start the lightning talks, so thank you so much.